our second speaker of the day. She's a very special woman. She's also a good friend of mine, Dr. Selena Milanovic, strategy consultant healthcare at Siemens Advanta Consulting. So Selena is young in years but highly accomplished. She's listed in Forbes 30 under 30. She holds a PhD in biomedical engineering from the University of Oxford. She contributed to a human-centric COVID-19 recovery plan, for which she won an award from the World Economic Forum, where she is currently a global shaper. As a result of her achievements and her leadership experience, she was awarded the Next Generation Women's Leaders Prize by McKinsey & Company, and also received a royal family invite to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia as a young leader in healthcare. Today, Selena will be speaking about walking into the digital future. So welcome, Selena.
Fantastic, thank you. Assalamu alaikum, good morning everyone. So as many of the speakers, I of course prepared this presentation originally in Urdu, but then was asked to switch it to English, so I hope it's fine for everybody. Aside from that, when I was invited to this conference, I was incredibly thrilled and absolutely knew that already I wanted to talk to you about digitalization and the great potential about it with this country. And you would ask why? Well, it's very simple, because you are so young. Pakistan's median age is 23. That is incredibly young compared to all the other countries, particularly in Europe. So where I come from in Italy, the median age is 48, which is almost double. And for digitalization, what does that mean? That ultimately means that the uptake of digital technology is a lot slower compared to the one you could have in your country, simply because of two primary reasons. On the one hand, the users we're talking about are going to be a lot more adaptable to speedy technology, high tech, simply because all the young people are really eager to interact with high tech devices. And on the other hand, when it comes to the workforce, you have a fantastic plethora of inspirational and very engaged young people interested in IT sectors. So as you can tell, I am a huge enthusiast of tech. However, I do believe that technology is not all about engineering and science. I really believe that we should also closely collaborate and interact with institutions, such as also governments, to really promote and make sure that we are yielding and using our strengths and advances in tech to ultimately achieve the right goals to improve society's life. And while I started out my early academic years as a mechanical engineer and later on went to specialize myself, ultimately getting a PhD in biomedical engineering at Oxford, I decided to shift away from this very detailed, oriented, and very theoretical scientific career to shift into the pragmatic world, and this is ultimately why I joined Siemens as a company where, amongst other things, we really propel and accelerate digitalization across a variety of industries and geographies. And so, as I mentioned, I really am a strong believer in the collaboration between high-tech companies and businesses, as well as governments, to propel change, which is why I engage also with institutes such as the Bill and Melinda Gates Research Foundation, the World Economic Forum, etc. Because ultimately, technology is here to improve our lives. If we look at history, humanity has been striving to find ways to sort of get shortcuts to labor and just make life a lot easier, which we see, for example, in the 17th century with the Industrial Revolution, where we started using water and steam to make our lives and labor easier. On the other hand, about 100 years later, we went into mass production. As everybody knows, in the automotive industry, that was a radical change. Later on, we're basically already starting to look into IT and electronic solutions. And then we reach the 2000s, where everybody is talking about connected devices, IT, technology, cybersecurity already is popping up. And then 20 years later, as in today, we're talking about the future where there's a human in machine interface that is sort of getting blurry, because we're really talking about AI all the time, we're talking about big data. And what you see in this transition, however, is not only the strive towards constantly investing in technology and engineering, but also this is not a linear curve. We're not gradually being interested in it, but it's an exponential interest. And to the point that only about 7 years ago, we were talking about Industry 4.0, and already today, we're in 5.0. But what does that really mean? So both are digitalization concepts, but in Industry 4.0, we're sort of more focused towards automizing everything. Everything should work on its own. We should have these factory floor plans where everything runs smoothly and without manpower. And today, we're already talking about human interfaces in the way that we're looking at how AI and humans ultimately can further detach themselves from this constant automated system. And radically, we're really moving from a one-size-fits-all kind of model where you're producing hundreds and thousands and millions of the same product towards a present where we want personalized solutions. Just think about it. Everything needs to be personalized today. If you think in the clothing industry, from the very simple things like having personalized bags or jackets with your, although being at a fixed brand, you want some personal touch in it. In the medical sphere, we're looking at personalized care and personalized drugs. And so what we can ultimately see in the market is that there are three key dimensions that are along with market growth that are pushing this digitalization forward. So the markets are growing with the populations rising and with the people's ability to instantly purchase things. On the other hand, there is the constant rise of new products and therapies in the medical segment. And with that, there is also a rise of uncertainty. How are we going to do things? How do we prioritize causes? And also there is, of course, the cost pressure. With more and more competitors arising, both not only in the large industry space, but also in the startup space, we're forced to act quickly. And primarily, the industry, I would say, has these four key pillars of activity that needs to face. On the one hand, industry needs to be very flexible. We need to be able to adapt, we need to be able to personalize, we need to be able to shift our ways of working. And to do that, we also need to be very fast. So speed becomes essential. With that, the rise of the need of quality. We're moving away from a model where we buy things today and we throw them away tomorrow. Because as we heard also from Senator Sherry Raham yesterday, we have a focus on sustainability. We need to make sure that we're living in a more sustainable world, so quality is becoming more and more important. And finally, also, we need to get more efficient. And so you could see, wow, there are all these names popping up, 5G, blockchain, big data. We've heard them also during this conference. Can we just ignore all of that and move forward? Technically, as industries and as companies, you could, and also as a country, you could. However, the progress over time and your footprint over time and mark ultimately in the world would be a linear steady growth instead of an exponential one. So there is really a critical need to act today when it comes to digitalization, and particularly in Pakistan, precisely for the reasons mentioned in the beginning, because you have the user base that are interested in digital technology. You have the right talent to achieve all these things. So I would really, really urge you to really get very interested and very engaged in these topics to ultimately reap the fruits of it very soon. And one could think, wow, all these changes seem like a lot. How should I suddenly digitalize my entire companies? It's a huge investment. It's going to take time. And of course, you can't sort of have an approach of trial and error because it's very expensive. And this is where the concept of digital twin comes in very handy. So digital twinning is basically about creating a digital copy of the real world. You can do it either for a specific product you're producing or for a process. And ultimately, you follow a circular path then. You create your digital twin, you optimize a solution in it, you realize it, and then you sort of do a trial and error only in the digital space. And this technique, while it might seem very fuzzy and distant, is actually a very well-renowned and very well-accepted way of proofing your innovation. Now, of course, being an expert in healthcare, I will draw some examples from the health space of what this digital future could look like, where digitalization and the real world sort of are merging. And let's look at a complex of hospital buildings, right? But you can, of course, translate it to research facilities, to smart cities, etc. So these are just examples. What you can achieve, for example, with investing in this dual nature of infrastructure is, on the one hand, when it comes to sustainability, it's a lot easier to monitor, let's say, air quality or waste management. Again, very critical factors in every country today. And as we also heard yesterday from your government speakers, something that the governments themselves would be very eager to incentivize and support. And this is something we see in countries over and over, that the funds for these innovations, if they match the government's ultimately requirements and promises for the future, can also be supported financially. Again, one more reason to really propel in this change and be the first in the runner-up in these changes. On the other hand, when we're talking digital hospitals, of course, we're talking also about clinical efficiency. You're monitoring patient flow in and out, you're optimizing surgical cycles, you're of course increasing security with the fact that everything is monitored, trackable, both when it comes to the patient experience as well as for the devices themselves. It's of course an experience for the employees as well, because processes are streamlined, but also for patients themselves, who ultimately get a much easier and smoother process and experience. And so with all this being said, you think, okay, now we're ready, now we're set. Now we know how to, what the aims and the potentials of digitalizations are. And then, as usual in our world, by the time you figure something out, something new comes along. The Metaverse. The Metaverse came into our lives and we're all sort of confused. What does it really mean? How do we do it? How do we integrate it? How do we become hip also as a company by introducing it in our slogans and in our innovations? So with this, I just want to shed some light, really a couple of minutes, on what it actually means to integrate a Metaverse. When it comes to healthcare, but this is also, of course, very translatable, what you have is suddenly a continuous flow of information that is synchronous, which ultimately means that there's a constant flow where both the real world and the digital world interact and influence each other. This is a really key aspect of it. On the other hand, you're enabling transactions, as discussed by many of the speakers yesterday, and ultimately it is also interoperable, which ultimately means that multiple sources of data can be integrated in one, which is, I'm sure any of you who are very active in the tech space know that is a critical issue usually, to combine software knowledge and inputs from multiple sources. And in the realm particularly of healthcare, the integration of the Metaverse brings many advantages. When it comes to R&D, which is usually the most expensive part for pharmaceutical companies, especially the smaller ones that really rely on constantly having new products, you could have really a much more cost-effective way of doing research because of all the data that is available out there. When it comes to personalized care, you would be able to, of course, improve that as well, because you would have access to all the patient data with like simple healthcare cards that can be scanned and that hold everything in an integrated way. When it comes to diagnostics, you could rely on data of patients you get from other countries to improve diagnostics in yours. And ultimately, also, this applies both to treatment and infrastructure. But with all of this sounding so exciting, you are certainly thinking, okay, let's do it, let's jump on the train. And when we look at the opportunities in the digital space, there are so many, and there have been on the rise. Think about it and really look at some data really quickly. You could see that just about 20 years ago, in 2003, we had about 0.5 billion devices connected to this IoT network. 20 years later, we have 100 times more. We're talking about 50 billion devices, all connected. We're talking about the network that is rapidly, incredibly rapidly expanding. And while this creates immense data opportunities for us to learn from, to interact, and to integrate in our systems and processes, we need to be aware of the risks. And when I mean risk, I mean usually cybersecurity. So with the rise, of course, of multiple ways of connecting devices, of multiple types of devices connected, some being more vulnerable than others, some being more vulnerable than others, you have an increased risk of cyber attacks, and this is something to be aware of. And we see that in companies. In companies today, there is also a shift in a focus towards cybersecurity, simply to ensure, of course, the safety and the usability of this data. So while you could have a growing risk of cyber attacks, so you could have it because of the rapidly changing technology, there are also more and more laws that are being implemented, both locally and on a global level, to ultimately help promote digitalization, however, in a very responsible and conscious way. And this, again, just an example from the healthcare space, is critical because let's talk about patient impact. If we're talking about cyber attacks and you're thinking of the small, tiny devices like pacemakers that really set the rhythm of your heart, and talk about cyber attacks, somebody could have basically the ability to alter it. Of course, it's a huge risk, and this is why medtech companies are, of course, investing a lot into creating secure devices. When it comes to data protection, needless to say, data needs to stay personal on a certain level. Same when it comes to medical regulation and ultimately the infrastructure legacy. So with all of this being said, I really hope that one thinks, wow, this is a fantastical opportunity and we certainly want to engage in it, but there are so many aspects, where do we start from? And this is why ultimately at Siemens in the consulting space, we have a broad range of over 8,000 experts across the globe to really help our clients in different segments of digitalization, be it in energy, mobility, smart infrastructure, or even healthcare, to ultimately achieve their goals in an efficient, effective, and sustainable way. And because ultimately our experiences lie, on the one hand, we're basically a very well-founded engineering company, so we have all the technical knowledge necessary to implement these huge transformations for companies across the globe, but also have the breadth of the business and financial understanding and the vision of trends in these segments. So, what do you say? Are you ready to accelerate change and digitalization in Pakistan? As I hope you've seen, I certainly am. So if you want to get in touch either during lunch, a tea break, or even later after the conference, feel free to scan the QR code and connect via LinkedIn or via email. Thank you so much, and looking forward to talking to you more about digitalization in different realms. Thank you. Thank you.